Good morning, ma'am, and good morning, everyone, as well as good afternoon and good evening if you see these topic presentations of mine at your convenient time. For most, I will be discussing experiment survey, but before we jump on to that topic, let us first read the learning objectives that we will meet at the end of the lesson. At the end of the lesson, the students will be able to identify what is survey, experiment, and experiment survey. Define and differentiate what is survey, experiment, and experiment survey, and develop critical thinking skills by answering provoking questions inclined with experiment survey. Now, let us differentiate what is survey and experiment before we tackle experiment survey. To start with, survey is the process of gathering information from a sample of individuals through conducting a set of questionnaires. It involves asking questions in a structured way, either through an interview or a questionnaires. Survey is a systematic approach in understanding people's behavior, opinions, and characteristics. The survey can be used in different researches. And also, survey can be used in both studies, either it is qualitative or quantitative research. And also, survey, it is cost-effective since it is inexpensive because you can survey through a questionnaire, or an interview. Survey also can gather a large information or data from a large group of people compared to the experiment. Are we clear with the survey? Now, we will tackle what is experiment. Experiment is a systematic approach used to investigate causal relationship among variables. This means researchers manipulate or isolate one or more independent variables to observe its effect to one or more dependent variables while controlling extraneous factors. The goal of the experiment is to establish whether changes in the independent variable causes changes to the dependent variable, thereby identifying cause and effect relationship. To further comprehend the various aspects of survey and experiment and how they differ with each other, I presented here a chart comprising its different when in terms in the field of research. Survey is used in gathering information from a respondent of the population. Meanwhile, experiment it uses scientific method or approach wherein the variable being studied is being manipulated or isolated for a hypothesis testing, wherein it is not always applicable in the real life setting. And for the purpose of the survey is to gather knowledge in fields such as social research, including social issues, human behaviors, and societal structure. Meanwhile, experiment aim to establish causal relationship. When we are talking about causal relationship, it is how independent variables influence the dependent variables to establish cause and effect relationship. And of course, survey is used in descriptive research, meanwhile experiment uses in experimental research. And when talking about the sample size, survey can gather a large of information or data from a large group of people, meanwhile sample size in an experiment is relatively small. And in terms of data collection, survey can gather data through interviews or in a form of questionnaire. Meanwhile, experiment is through several readings or through laboratory testing. Are we clear with the difference of the survey and experiment? Moreover, we will tackle about the experiment survey. So what is an experiment survey? It is a method where it combines the characteristic of the two systematic approach, the survey and the experiment. And what does it mean if it is talking about manipulating or isolating one or more independent variable to directly see the influence on the other variables? This means by manipulating or isolating independent variables by controlling its environment, it can cause changes on the dependent variable. And by hypothesis testing, it will establish the effect of the manipulation or the isolation of the variable. To further understand, let's take for example. Imagine a research is testing whether the new technique improves the student test score. So the researcher will divide the students into two groups. One group uses the new techniques and the other group uses the traditional study. And after a set of period, both groups take the same test and the researcher compares the score to see the new techniques made a significant difference. And for clarification, the independent variable here is the new technique where it influenced the test score or the dependent variable. And another example is the researcher is testing different fertilizer on plant growth. So the researcher will plant identical seed with similar soil but different fertilizer for each group of plant. By measuring its height and the health of the plants over time, the research would determine which fertilizer promotes the best growth. Furthermore, the independent variable here is the types of fertilizers which it influence the dependent variables or the growth of the plant. Now, we will be tackling the strength of the experiment survey. It provides strong evidence for causality. Experiment survey has a direct manipulations on the variables wherein it allows researchers to identify cause and effect relationship with high degree of confidence. And also it makes the most reliable and trustworthy hypothesis testing by identifying how one factor can affect another. Another form of strength of the experiment survey is its control over variable. In an experiment survey, which can carefully control the condition where the study take place and reducing the influence of the external factor. By this means, this high level of control makes it easier to isolate the effect of independent variable, leading to more accurate and reliable result. However, experiment survey is not without its criticism. One criticism is it can lack ecological validity. Since experiment survey is controlled of artificial settings or surroundings, the result might not always applied to the real-world situations. The behavior observed in a lab, for example, might be different on how people act in everyday life. Another criticism of the experiment survey is it can be resource intensive. Conducting a well-designed experiment can be time-consuming, expensive, and require careful planning, wherein research must often invest its significance in resources, the participants, and data collection, which can make this method less accessible to certain studies. In conclusion, experiment survey play a pivotal role in making significant change in the lives of people. One step, one act of the experiment survey will change what we started and what we hope for. It might be resource intensive, but on the other side, it is cost effective. Experiment survey, it does not only change the lives and the living of the people, but somehow it helps the community in some other way, such as research institutes and commercial industries. To close this chapter, I will flash two provoking questions that might quite weaken up your critical thinking skills and problem-solving approach. First is, what will happen if the independent variable fail to influence the dependent variable? And the other one is, what will happen to the research study if the experiment survey provided inaccurate data? And that would be all. Thank you for listening, and I would like to extend my deepest gratitude for giving so much attention for my topic presentation. Goodbye and God bless you all.